Welcome to The Roll Forward, a podcast for the next wave of finance leaders, especially those looking to transform their roles by making smarter, faster, and more profitable business decisions using the power of technology and a forward-looking approach to finance. Listen in to learn how to get out of the back office trenches and become a more strategic partner within your organization.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Roll Forward podcast. My name is Joe Michalowski, and this episode is brought to you by Mosaic, a strategic finance platform that changes the way business gets done. And I'm joined as always by our co-founder, COO, Joe Garofalo, and today also joined by Aneal Vallurupalli, the CFO of Airbase, leader in spend management space. And we're just really excited to have Aneal here to talk to us about financial data management. But first things first, Aneal, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So just to kick things off, pretty basic, can you just tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up at Airbase, what your career path has been like?
Yeah, happy to. So I think, in finance, you can, as a financial leader, you have the potential to come up many different tracks. And my track started off early on the tech M&A side. So I started during the recession, actually, back in 2008 and 9, in investment banking, and more specifically working with technology companies. And even more specifically, 90% of the deals I worked on were software businesses. And so that was a track I came up. And since then, the last 10 years, actually 12 years, has been working within software businesses, and anywhere from as small as Series A and to post public and 4,000 or 5,000 employees, $10, $15 billion. So ideally, what that should help provide is some ability to see around the corner for these companies as we're in an earlier stage.
Gotcha.
And Airbase specifically, I actually met Tejo about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago actually now, and right when he was thinking of building the product, and right around when they were coming out with the first look into it. And at that time, I was at a company called Mattermost, and Mattermost essentially was a more secure version of Slack, focused on developer collaboration, and we were open source. And because we were open source, we were very international. So we had, I think when I joined, it was fairly small, around 30 employees or 30 staff, and we had already been in 15 countries at that point in terms of representation. So international payments, international subsidiary support was super important. And Tejo had mentioned, you still need to come on to Airbase. Trust me, I'm going to build it someday. I'm going to build international subsidiary support. I'm going to build international payments. And obviously today we have those items. So Tejo and I kept in touch, and ultimately I've used all those products out there. I've used Bill.coms, the Expensifys, the Divvies, the Ramps, the even Accrualifys. Not many people have heard of Accrualify. And I can say that what compelled me to come here is ultimately I believe our product is the best product for both SMB, early stage businesses, all the way up to mid-market and IPO and beyond businesses.
Wow, very cool. I always love to hear from any guests about how they've used the actual products that they are now part of, selling. Like, you're not actually selling the product, but it must be pretty cool to just be there and know that they're working on something that's so important to you every day. So yeah, like I said, really, really excited to have you here. Main topic is based on an intro article that you did when you joined Airbase mid last year. I think it was July. And something that really stuck out to us at Mosaic, it's just something that's close to what we do, is this idea you had of Airbase being at an inflection point, and how kind of because of that, one of your first priorities would be building out a more robust data engineering infrastructure to support where Airbase is going. Can you just talk a little bit about what you meant when you said that, like what prioritizing that means and why it's such an important project for you all?
Yeah, I think to take a bunch of buzzwords out of it, it's essentially, how do we make Airbase a data-driven business at our DNA?
Yep.
Right? How does every part of the org leverage data to make faster decisions and more informed decisions? And so ultimately, what you're looking to do with that is selfishly from finance, it makes our lives much easier, yes. But we are ones who are oftentimes looking at data sets that touch various parts of the organization, everything from product usage to customer data and call it your software subscriptions and your renewals and et cetera, right? You can see how that literally spans the whole gambit, even down to our internal usage of our own product, our internal usage of our own software systems. And so with that being in mind, you can see that if we can't answer questions quickly, then we're unable to make strategic decisions quickly. And at this stage of a business, when you're a Series A, B, C, D business, waiting months or a month or 2 months to make a strategic decisions can be the difference between having that incremental or hockey stick growth, especially when you compound it across tens of decisions that need to be made in every part of the org. So I think that's the focus around it. And really the article that I wrote was around that the earlier we can start that muscle and build that muscle memory up to becoming data-driven as a business, the better off the company will be at a later stage.
Gotcha. Something that Joe asked you like right before we started recording this is like how finance builds that technical muscle. And so before I kind of want to shift into that, which is, I guess the question is there a difference between building a data engineering infrastructure, as you called it, versus focusing on financial data management, or are they kind of just one and the same because finance does touch all of those different parts of the business?
Yeah, I mean, there are similarities, yes. And ultimately, I think that it comes down to what are you doing? How much of the data are you leveraging for reporting purposes? And how much of the data is actually being used to operate the business? Example, on the billing systems, like you can literally revamp your entire billings architecture to go pay as you go, right? You can actually, to low touch, no friction, ask for a credit card swipe up front. But in order to enable that on the data engineering back end, to go to a low friction or zero friction adoption, call it product-led growth motion, what that means is you literally need to integrate something like a Stripe. You then need to create a billings and licensing API provisioning tool that automatically knows that this customer has inputted a credit card. I need to then send out a subscription link for them to click and to start going on the product, right? And then to start billing based off of that. That's just one example of how it can be a little different. And then do you leverage a similar architecture, meaning a data warehouse on the back end that uses that information? Yes. To then enrich your ERP on, did this customer get billed? And then to enrich your CRM. Did we sign a new customer, closed one, done, right? That minute? Or does it take 2 hours? Does it take 10 days? These are all ways that it's all really interconnected.
Gotcha. Joe, so I guess I would ask you, Joe, is I know you've had trouble or challenges in the past for your careers being pushed to have that technical skill set in finance when that's not traditionally like a finance sort of skill set. So I'll turn it to you, Joe, and just see, what your experience has been, and maybe the two of you have more in common, or maybe Aneal, maybe you have more of that technical background. How do you guys kind of work through that?
Yeah, and it's an age-old debate, right? Does finance own the intentional architecture and how the systems flow, or is it an IT-led project? And I think the right answer is it should be collaborative. If you think about Aneal's example that he was just talking about, it's just like the customer lifecycle. Your customer is going to go through so many systems by the time they're closed won, starting with the lead in the marketing software, HubSpot potentially, close one deal in Salesforce. Then it comes time to invoice the customer in Stripe, and then you have to collect the cash. It's like right there, that customer journey is broken across 4 different systems. Mm-hmm. And if you're not linking your customer records across those 4 different systems, it's really hard to answer questions like, how are these cohorts performing? When did we sign this customer? How long was the sales cycle? How long did it take for us to complete the first upsell? But what I really like about what Aneal said is like being data driven. I think it's finance's responsibility to make the org become data driven. Whether or not they can implement the technology behind that is a different question, and would love to get your thoughts there, Aneal, on that piece, but generally in line.
Yeah, I think when we in finance accept that we hold the rest of the org to a certain level of accountability when it comes to prove out that business thesis. Tell me, why does that make sense? Why do we need to invest more? Why are we putting more in the PLG motion versus our outbound BDR outbound motion, right? How does that pan out, right? Does it mean we have higher conversion ratios in the PLG, even though we have a more delayed time to actually get a customer to pay us $1, right? Especially if you're a freemium based PLG motion, right? I've been at a couple companies now where we've had both PLG credit card swipe, and at some point based on usage, it converts to enterprise agreement, right? And then you go a different route where you actually end up going the typical NetSuite invoice and prototypical MSA route. And so having both of those motions can be important. But I think the main piece is that if finance can accept that we can get better answers selfishly if we actually make the rest of the org have the ability to surface the data sets they need faster, then we actually take the ownership away from us putting it in a model and making our own assumptions. And we're actually pushing it out to the org for them to self-serve that data and come to us with recommendations as to why they would change something. So I think it's kind of similar to what Airbase does in terms of spend management. We don't just make it a part of finance's job to look at how are we progressing on our Heroku monthly card spend. The owner of that card at the org that sits in, call it the engineering department, will look at that card and say, wait a minute, why am I at max usage already for this card and it's only midway through the billing cycle? So it's one way to surface the data to people such that they can take ownership of it versus finance feeling like we're reacting to data.
I love the self-serve conversation. I feel like it's something that comes up in a lot of the conversations we have, not just on this podcast, but in webinars we've done. When we talk to finance people, that self-serve idea comes up again and again. And I feel like obviously it's kind of like an ideal state. Like this isn't something that you just overnight, you say like, great, now like everything in the company is a self-serve piece of the finance function. And so, to roll it back to how this is going for you at Airbase, you said that it was an inflection point when you joined and it was time to start putting this in place. So what did this look like at Airbase when you joined? And, it's been 6+ months. So like maybe if you've started some initiatives, like what were the first priorities, things like that?
Yeah. So let's talk about what it's like when you coming into a company fresh, right? And this has happened a few times for me now where you come into the company fresh and you're like, wait a minute, what are we using to report what information? Where do I go for this? Where do I go to understand what we signed in closed won bookings last month? Where do I go to understand of those closed won bookings, have those customers gone live yet? Where do I then go to understand of those ones that have gone live, are they at 50% usage or max usage of their product that they've signed up for? And what you start to find out through that discovery is that your systems, the visualization tools you use on top of those systems and to understand what data that those systems are telling you are oftentimes very disparate. They're all across the org and with various ownership. And one thing that I found helpful when coming into a company is to just literally take a step back and say, what are the metrics that we care about as a company to run our business? And let's start to define those metrics. That's everything down from what is a booking. Definition of booking is different at like literally almost every company, right? And there's certainly market standards for how you think about a booking. Do you base it off of ARR, ACV, TCV? There's so many different ways you can look at it. But if you align the business around those definitions, around what is new ARR, what is expansion ARR, what is contraction, what is churn, what's resurrection, right? What's the definition behind resurrection? Is it considered resurrection within 90 days or after 90 days? These are all just examples of where you start to have this feeling where the org is, if you can provide clarity around the definitions, then we can start to figure out how do we track those metrics. Once we figure out how we track those metrics, we can say, wait a minute, the way we're tracking these metrics and for them to be actually accurate is really painful and is not really built for scale or automation. Then you figure out, okay, actually our existing architecture to define these things and to automate these things and to visualize these things is very suboptimal. What should it look like? What should our data architecture, our data map look like for the business? Once we've done that at Airbase, which we have done all of that in the last 6 months, and we've aligned with product, with sales, with CS, with marketing, right? Those are the big ones, and finance. And we have a different animal or different beast here at Airbase because we also have a financial services component in that we have billions of dollars flowing through our systems that are not our money. Right. So we need to be able to reconcile all of that in real time. And so now that we've figured out the data map, we can say, hey, wait a minute, I need to go hire someone to own this. So we actually have someone starting very soon here who's going to be leading and owning all of our business systems and analytics efforts. And they're basically called the quarterback. If all of your systems and all of your teams, call it your product operations, sales operations, marketing operations, CS, rev ops, finance ops, are all, positions on a football field, the business systems and analytics group is kind of your quarterback. They're the ones who are helping understand, what changes can you make within NetSuite or within Salesforce or within Marketo or within Zendesk can you make that won't break the data model of the business. And so that's kind of how I think about, like, step by step by step. How do you just start to peel back the onion?
Yeah.
And start to figure out, what do we do next?
Yeah.
I love that. Quick follow-up question, Aneal. Where does that business systems hire or that team sit within the organization?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, ultimately it comes down to who on a leadership team has what superpower, right? And it reports to me now, and that's because I've built it before. I've built the BI team. I built the data and analytics team at 2 companies now. And by the way, that doesn't mean it has to sit here forever, right? We are all, and when we're in a super high growth phase, every leader at the company is literally doing everything we can to make the company successful. And it's not about empire building at all. But me, selfishly, I want everyone around the company to make decisions faster and with more information. And so we, in the finance, especially if you bring in a strong FP&A person that can help play that glue across the orgs, right? Think about your marketing, sales, CS funnel metrics that you look at to build your financial model. If FP&A and finance are building a really good relationship with those teams, you're actually co-building the needs around the data together. And everyone understands why you need that information. And so I think it has a natural place within finance, especially if the finance leader takes ownership of that spearheading effort. I've also seen it take place within product, right? Product leaders, I've seen product leaders own that function before as well, because especially in a product-led growth motion, so much of data usage within the product dictates the feature you build next. And so it's really, kind of down to the business rationale behind why that person needs to do it. What I do see, though, is that there starts to become a couple of nuances. One, who leads the effort? 2, does that team immediately need its own data engineering team? Or can we leverage the tech team's data engineering team to help us at least build out some of the plumbing with, like, your snowflakes, et cetera, and the connections to the product warehouse and the product information that you need? And then the next piece comes around, centralized or decentralized data analysts, right? So at a certain stage, it makes sense for us to just keep all of the SQL and data analysts centralized so teams can come and ask questions. And another stage, when you get much larger, you need to decentralize it. You need people who are actually writing. You need SQL experts potentially within each one of these groups.
This topic is really near and dear to Mosaic's heart, because we're not me personally, but I think the company as a whole is a little bit spoiled in this regard, because we have our 3 founders are all finance background people. So, like, there's probably a delay in, like, how early we need to set up, like, all of these different finance functions, because they bring that expertise across the whole company. But it's also a problem that we're trying to solve, like trying to take some of that tech expertise out of, like, the list of requirements for getting this done. And so I will probably butcher this if I try to say it myself. So I would love to get your take on what we call, like, a golden framework, and it's really Joe's baby. So I'll turn it to Joe and let him explain kind of like how we've approached this data management problem in the past, and maybe just see, like, what your thoughts are and how that would work in the context of how you're handling it at Airbase.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, Aneal, you said that so eloquently that you almost made it sound easy, but it's certainly not an easy thing to do, right? Like, it requires a lot of investment, a lot of time, a lot of thought, and a lot of people. So the concept of golden framework is really how can we help build this thing that every company needs internally without reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch each time. So for us, it starts with easy integrations to core systems. A lot of the ones that you mentioned, like NetSuite, like the Salesforces of the world, the Stripes, the HubSpots, Marketos, so that we can pull that data into a central data repository. And rather than writing code and having to pull your tech team resources, which many people don't have the luxury of doing, right? High growth companies, the engineers are focused on building product versus building the decision engine internally. So how can we kind of jumpstart that process with a piece of software that doesn't require a team of SQL experts? But like you mentioned, I think that's more and more where the role of finance is heading, is if you don't have these technical skill sets, if you can't write code in SQL or Python, you're probably not going to be able to get the answers to the business that you need just with how the world is going. So the golden framework concept is, how do we integrate those point solutions into a central data repository and do the joins and the mappings of data without the need for SQL? So near and dear to our heart, but I'm sure you're building your own version with all the complex data that you have at Airbase.
Yeah, I mean, look, for us, I think that it's kind of funny, right? As I mentioned, we have starting soon who we're all very excited about, and who's not only done this before, but also done this before for fintech business, right? Processing billions of dollars. So not only
or higher right there.
Exactly. And so, but what's so important is that we understand what are the priorities for the company right now, right? So this person could come in and you could look everywhere and find something broken. Yep. And then it would seem like an insurmountable task to try and get everyone what they need, because everyone's literally banging on your door, right? And so that's why oftentimes people who have some level of business operations background or consulting background or can help in this type of a role, because they are very good at prioritizing and ruthlessly prioritizing what matters most to the business. And at this stage, it's oftentimes revenue, right? And so what are the changes you can make or the things you can optimize in terms of reporting that drive that incremental dollar of revenue faster? And so I think that it becomes, as you mentioned, Joe, the benefit of using a software when you don't have the ability to make a large investment around this, right, is ultimately that you can get to this type of a framework faster, more nimbler, right?
Yep.
We at Airbase are dealing, it's all depending on the company situation. It's literally always dependent. I always get scared of people who come in and say that I'm very afraid of a leader who comes in and says, I have a playbook. Because I've never been able to take a playbook from another company and literally apply it to the existing company. Because I think there's scenarios, there's context every company has. That's a why behind why something is situated or done a certain way. And so I think what's so important is that Airbase, we are literally 4 or 5xing, right, in terms of our pace. And that means that we have to answer questions really quickly and make that investment around this, because very soon we're going to have teams, data engineering teams and InfoSec and all of this built out at the company. But what I do like, about Mosaic is that you can kind of get to that framework quickly and nimbly. And you can probably do it without needing 5 FP&A people, as an example. And so I think it all is a balance between stage of business and kind of where you're going.
Exactly. And it also puts in that intentional architecture that you need across the business at the earliest moment. But totally hear you. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, to take this out of this is not, a Mosaic plug or anything, to take it out of the software equation, you're coming in at Series B and you're saying that this is an inflection point. What advice, like let's say Airbase was actually a year earlier and now you have a chance to start even sooner. Is there like a piece of advice you would have, Aneal, for somebody maybe like a year earlier than Airbase would be? It's like, okay, like great, you're in a better position than even we are at Airbase to get this done sooner. Here's step one. And maybe it's the same as your steps before? Because I know you started kind of at first principles with metrics, but very curious what your approach would be.
It's funny, right? Because there's a fine balance. And I always say that, uses the word balance, right? You've probably heard me say it many times already. There's a balance between how much do you invest for the future and how much do you invest for now? A lot of what we're talking about here really helps drive decisions in the future. And once it's in a good state, helps you drive decisions now. But there's a painful period between now and then. And so one of the things you try and find is the company found its product market fit. Once you've found that product market fit, I've found that investors, your board, your leadership team are more open to undertaking these data revamp, data architecture type products, because you say, okay, we've got the thing. We've got a thing that people want and they want to pay us a good amount of money for. And now that we have that, we can invest in these things. So I will say, as someone who's going, Series A or seed, when you start to see product market fit is when you start to really look into, is it worth starting to track these things and look at these things, and also accept it's not going to be perfect. Like, my vision for what Airbase can be and what we can accomplish with the business systems, analytics, data engineering, all of that. I mean, it'll take years, right? It'll take a year or two where you literally have every person at the company with the information at their fingertips regarding, what they're trying to achieve at the business.
I'd love to look forward a little bit and talk a little bit about what advantages are you hoping to have as a team? I know you said this could be a really long-term project, but in the next 6 months, as you bring on this new hire, what immediate advantages are you like, great, I can't wait till June when our team is able to do X, Y, and Z because we've taken these steps?
Yeah, I think what you try and do when you're building out one of these teams is, I'm a big believer that you showcase material wins. And this is for anybody in any part of the org. If you can find someone material wins within their first 90 days of being at a company, there's literally data showcasing with a high R squared that they're with a 90% plus likelihood are going to be sticky at the business and feel successful in their job. So this is really important to me, right? And so, number one, how do we get ARR reporting down from X to within 5 minutes? My prior company used to take us 2 weeks to actually finalize all the data around ARR and report that out. We got that down to 2 minutes in real time, right? And that actually happened within 6 months. So that's an example of what one quick thing you can do: bookings reporting, ARR reporting. The next thing I would love to see is a surfacing of our product data by customer in a way that our go-to-market teams can actually make better decisions. And one of those big examples can be, how amazing would it be if you are a customer success manager and you have a set of 10 accounts you need to go renew next month or 2 months from now, and you could look at, okay, of those 10 accounts that I have to renew next month or 2 months from now, of those customers, how many are sub 50% product usage? Because that probably means I shouldn't just send out the renewal form. Probably means I need to go have some conversations there. Oh, by the way, did any of those customers have a champion change internally? Well, if I'm sub 50% usage and the champions changed internally, probably looking at a churn event, right? And so these are examples of how you can surface that information faster. Another piece, right, is we have now Airbase Essentials, which is our free product. It's important for us to understand within our free product, how many bill payments is a customer sending, right? How many reimbursements are they processing? Because oftentimes those businesses don't understand that we could actually save them money by going to our paid product, right? And so I think those are things that we will do within the next 6 months. And we're excited to see what they can do for the teams here.
Crazy. Love to hear real-time reporting. I think I'm going to have to send this to the entire product team at Mosaic, because it's just like a laundry list of things we need to make sure we can solve for people in finance. This is a total tangent, just based on what you mentioned just now. How new is the free program at Airbase? I didn't realize that was something that it sounds like you just put it in.
Well, what's actually interesting is we had a freemium product about, I think, 8-9 months ago. And it's only within the last 3 months we've started to really showcase it. And, one of the biggest values too here at Airbase is that not only do we have an awesome Essentials product, but we also offer the highest cashback rates in the industry at 1.75% if we are to underwrite you, 2.25% if you're in a pre-funded model for your cards. So, both of those things came out at the same time where we said, wait a minute, we know we have the best mid-market product out there. And it's actually pretty easy for us to strip away some of those features that, SMBs or sub 50 employee companies don't really need. You may think of that as, international payments or international subsidiary support, or SSO, one login, Okta support, or HRIS integrations. I'm sure, your 20-person company is not prioritizing your HRIS integration across your systems yet. And so that's kind of the evolution of it.
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit about how that transition's been just for the finance team, such a big product change. And Joe, maybe you have a better way to ask this question than I do, but obviously prioritizing that more product-led growth and shifting models there, or at least kind of bringing that to the spotlight? I feel like it must change a lot for how your finance team operates. And yeah,
Yeah,
like I
I
said,
mean,
Joe probably knows.
yeah, what's interesting though is that we are focused on servicing paying customers, right? I mean, that is where the majority of our effort goes because customers are seeing value in using Airbase. I mean, we have public companies now that are using Airbase for all of their spend management. That's their accounts payable, their expense reimbursements, their virtual and physical corporate cards. When you're doing that for a public company, you're solving big issues for them, right? And so we will focus on those customers and we will ensure that we have a product at the lower end or the free end that can help solve problems for customers immediately and be a frictionless adoption. And I'll say that I think that's important because we really do believe here at Airbase that we have a product that can take care of your company from idea to IPO and beyond, right? And so, and there's always that balance of how much of the company's effort, dollars, headcount do you put in each one of those focus areas.
Yeah, it must be such a tricky challenge just trying to dig into the numbers. Are there ways that you can dig into the numbers and kind of decide how to prioritize those things? Is there a headcount planning model that you can put into place to make sure that you have the right support staff for the different levels? Like how are you all approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we've aligned with leadership team internally as well as investors as to what is this type of focus we will put on essentials, right?
Yeah.
What is quantified, right? So for me, it's coming from multiple companies where they were first-time CEO founders, which is amazing here at Airbase. They just found a company before, sold a business before, and I'm sure learned a lot from that and brings a lot of those learnings here. But oftentimes, I've worked with 5 first-time CEO founders in a row, and they were all product-led CEO founders. And so it was always, as a finance leader in those businesses, it was always difficult to get them to agree to something. And so, they would say, wait a minute, don't worry, we're not going to focus too much on freemium. We're not going to focus too much on this subsegment. Well, then it turns out our hiring plan for the next 6 months is entirely in that area, or our program dollar investment is entirely in that area. And so, bringing some of those learnings here, it was important for us to quantify that a bit, to put it in context.
Gotcha. Cool. Like I said, total tangent. Just heard you mention that the free tier was a little bit new or a new priority, and was just curious about how that was going. We're coming. I mean, we've been talking for a while. Aneal, I could probably just keep you here and keep asking you questions, and Joe could probably get you deep in the weeds on some of the finance topics. But there's really just one question that we leave every guest with, and it's a real basic one. Just this idea: what is something you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of your career, or advice that you would have for somebody like earlier on in a finance career?
Yeah, I think, it kind of goes back to what Joe had mentioned. I think that as a finance professional, as early in your career as you can accept that finance can actually be a change catalyst within a business versus, that person that people feel beholden to speak with on a monthly or quarterly or biweekly basis, right? I think that it's important that you accept that early on. And what that means when you start to feel like you can be an agent of change within a business, and you'll find that it makes you more inquisitive. It makes you want to ask more questions and accept, I don't know everything. So I literally ask a lot of questions, or I go speak to a lot of people externally who've seen this before. And what that means is that it gives you just a holistic understanding or better understanding of the company you're at, and then eventually the next company you go to.
I think it's great advice. I love that. Selfishly, my favorite question that we ask among guests, mostly because, I work in content, and it's just nice to hear people that have reached like a C-level or some sort of leadership role, especially in finance, talk about what things were like when, they were younger and what would have helped them get to the next step. So always love that kind of stuff. I think I can wrap up there. So just a final closing thought, like, is there somewhere people should go to learn more about you? Where can people follow you? Tell us, give us your pitch for Airbase. Where can we find Airbase? This is your time to shine.
I'll tell you a couple things. One, kind of mentioned earlier, Airbase, essentially what we do is we consolidate all of your non-payroll spend onto a single piece of software. Simple, easy to understand. What is non-payroll spend? It's your accounts payable, it's your expense reimbursements, and it's your physical and virtual corporate cards. Literally everything other than how you pay your employees. Right. And so where can you find us? Well, airbase.com, airbase.com. One thing that I will say selfishly, even if you don't want to purchase the software and you don't think it's value add, which I would I'm a biased opinion now, but I wasn't a biased opinion 8 months ago. I'll tell you that it will benefit your finance org at every stage. You will save time closing your books. You will save time hiring that next AP staff accountant to close your books. You will also have more insights driven across your org to the leaders who own the program spend within the system. But what I will say selfishly from your end is to join Off the Ledger, which is our community of over 3,000 plus finance professionals. You can learn everything on there as to what does Airbase do, but actually more importantly, hey, I have this question. How do I handle this one employee in this state and payroll and blah, blah, blah. Throw the question out there on Off the Ledger. And that's one thing that I've always found is very helpful is how, back in the day, 10 years ago, it wasn't easy to ask a question in our expertise. Now we've literally, with collaboration softwares out there and communities and orgs and forums, we've kind of democratized the ability to get information quickly. And so join the Off the Ledger, check out airbase.com, and we'd love to have you.
Spoken like a person who has his own podcast, for sure. You had that teed up, ready to go. To anyone, when you go to airbase.com, please listen to Aneal's podcast as well, talking to a lot of finance leaders. But yeah, so Aneal, thank you again for taking the time. Learned a lot in this conversation. I think there's a lot of really valuable takeaways that we can start putting out to people, get people listening to the episode. So it was really great having you on the roll forward, and hope we can do it again sometime in the future.
Joe, appreciate it. And Joe, thank you for having me, and y'all are building an awesome product as well at Mosaic.
Thanks, Aneal.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for checking out this episode of The Roll Forward. This show is powered by Mosaic, the strategic finance platform that transforms the way business gets done. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow The Roll Forward wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Or visit mosaic.tech/podcast to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.